Do you know what the latest science says about how you can grow as an athlete and enjoy your sport more? Well, the aim of this podcast is to dive into the science, take out some aspect of it, look at it, and then apply it in a real world way to you in the hope that you can do just that. Get more out of your sport. I'll be having these conversations every week with my fellow coach, Scott Finley, who is also a PhD student, so understands that scientific background, but also works in the real world with real athletes just like you. And so we will try and apply the scientific knowledge to you in your real world environment in the hope that it's helpful. So we hope that you enjoy the conversation that you're about to listen to and that it helps you get the most out of your sport.
Okay, hi everyone, welcome back. We are back here with the Elevate Multisport podcast, back here with Joel and Scott. We've got another article that we're going to look at today. Slightly different process that we'll maybe get into a bit later on, but we'll start off with the title. So the title is The Relationship Among the Components of Self-Compassion, a pilot study using a compassionate writing intervention to enhance self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. So as usual, that's quite a lot, but I'll go into a little explanation of it. But first, I thought it'd be good to just define self-compassion as they've talked about it in the paper. So self-compassion has been theorized to have three components, each with a positive pole and a negative pole. So self-kindness versus self-judgment, common humanity versus isolation, and mindfulness versus over-identification. And what they were trying to do in the paper was see whether improvements in one of these three components of self-compassion would spill across to the others. So, for example, whether mindfulness training would improve self-kindness and common humanity. Okay, as usual, into some quick-fire questions to Joel. Ready?
Yes.
Good. Is self-compassion relevant for athletes?
Absolutely.
Nice. Can self-compassion directly or indirectly improve performance?
Yes, it definitely can.
And we can maybe get into that later on as well. Can self-compassion be trained?
Yes, absolutely. Emphatic answers today.
Good. And I know that that's one of the first lines in the paper was that self-compassion can be trained. So that's a good one to finish on there.
Good.
Yeah. We won't go into too much detail about the actual study because I think that the content of it's kind of the topic that's the important part for us today.
Yeah.
Basically, some participants took part in a 8-week self-compassionate writing exercises. So they either had a mindfulness one, a kindness one, or a common humanity one. And as I said, they were trying to see whether the improvements in the one that they were doing spilled across into the other components.
Mm-hmm.
A very quick statement on the results. I mean, self-kindness didn't improve the other two. Common humanity partially improved self-kindness and mindfulness. But mindfulness was the mindfulness training was the big winner, which improved mindfulness, obviously, but also common humanity and self-kindness. Mm-hmm. Just as a starting point, one of the exercises they did was they wrote about a distressing experience, I think, and they kind of got them to think about it from their perspective and then to think about it as if it was a friend or someone also in that situation. It seems to me that exercise might be about getting people to recognize they're treating other people differently to themselves, i.e. they're being more compassionate to others, but not themselves. Do you think that's something that, I was going to use the word guilty, I think people are guilty of, but I don't think it's something people should be ashamed of because I think it's something that everyone does. Is that?
Yes, I think that's yeah, absolutely right. And before we move on, I want to take one step back. And just for the sake of anyone listening, we defined self-compassion. We didn't define those three elements of self-compassion. And I think that might be useful because although when I knew the explanation, they made sense to me, off the top of my head, I didn't know what they meant by common humanity. So what we have here is self-compassion with the three elements, as you described. The first element, self-kindness. So this is a kind attitude towards self in painful moments. Then we have common humanity. So this is the notion of recognizing yourself as being part of a community, part of humanity, and seeing that common ground as a chance to connect with other people. So in this scenario, it is, okay, there's something not great happened to me, but stuff that's not great happens to other people as well. And there's an opportunity to connect on that and not to feel that there is anything wrong with me because something has happened. This is part of the human condition. And then the third element is mindfulness. And there is a lot of definitions of mindfulness out there. So this isn't the exclusive and only definition, but for the purposes of this paper and this conversation, mindfulness is, reading from my notes, is holding suffering and personal flaws in a balanced awareness, not not so as to become kind of obsessed by negative feelings. So it's that idea of taking a moment and being aware that suffering is happening, but also that good stuff is happening at the same time. And it's not all of one or all of the other at any one time. And actually, for me, a lot of that is just about taking that moment to slow down. A lot of the reason that classic mindfulness of just shutting your eyes, laying on the floor, sitting down, thinking about your breath, attuning to the present moment is actually just so that we don't get swept away in the narrative of our emotions that tells us something's gone bad, so everything is bad. So mindfulness here is that balanced approach, that balanced appreciation that there is all sorts of stuff going on at the same time, and that is normal and to be expected.
Yeah, it's fine. You know, it's. I think I remember Sam, someone that we've worked with in the past with mindfulness stuff.
Yeah.
I remember him talking about anxiety and saying, you know, kind of, it's not anxiety, go away, leave me alone. It's sitting with the anxiety and saying, this is what it feels like to be anxious. This is, you know, this is what I'm experiencing, and that's, you know, and that's how you deal with it mindfully.
Excuse me interrupting the conversation for just 20 seconds. If you're new to the platform, there are 3 things you can do. When you finish listening to the podcast, take our 6 keys to unlocking your potential course. It's completely free. Then please sign up to the Team Elevate community. It's a great place to meet like-minded athletes who are on a learning journey just like you. And thirdly, if you liked what you found, you can sign up to our monthly membership plan, which gives you access to all of our resources, both now and in the future. So we hope to see you there soon.
So what I've done is I've pulled out a couple of quotes from the paper, and I thought I can read those out, and sort of that might tee up a bit of a conversation about them. I've got some questions to ask of you. Self-compassion has been found to be an effective buffer against distressing experiences, such that the more self-compassionate individuals are, the less strain they experience when faced with failure, rejection, or embarrassment. So that obviously has quite a lot of importance throughout all aspects of life. Why might it be specifically important in sport and for athletes?
Part of the nature of sport is that I think we're putting ourselves out there, and often we are at risk of rating ourselves against a particular performance or a particular result, and we're doing this publicly. So that is a non-exhaustive list of the ways that we are vulnerable and open to critique, attack, or judgment. And the crucial word in what you just said that I would draw listeners' ear to is that self-compassion can be a buffer. So it's not that it makes all of these external judgments or pressures or feelings of failure go away. It's that self-compassion can act as a buffer or a zone by which some of the impact of these things can be absorbed or neutralized, so that we don't immediately break under judgment or under critique or under what we or others perceive as failure. We have a toolkit that we can go back to where we can do X, Y, and Z. We can look at common humanity. We can work on mindfulness. We can do these things, show self-kindness, so that they don't affect us or as much or as quickly or for as long.
Yes, and I guess that feeds nicely into one of my other points, which was, we obviously want to be higher up that. So I guess that often there'll be a sliding scale, and we've talked about this before, like something like anxiety, where it's good to have a bit to keep you kind of focused, but too much can harm your performance. Maybe I'll read this quote out, and we can go into it. But each component of self-compassion constitutes sets of positive and negative cognitions and behaviors, where the positive set should be present, i.e., self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness, and the negative set should be absent, i.e., self-judgment, isolation, and over-identification. So, yeah, to me, this suggests that there isn't a role at all for the negative aspects here. What do you think about that?
I think that's true. We are all going to exist somewhere on a spectrum in this. So we're either going to have the negative aspects that you mentioned and that I mentioned in the study. So we're very self-judging, we're quick to judge. We isolate, which is the opposite of common humanity. So it's where we go, woe is me, this is only me, and we kind of disconnect and we don't try and connect with other people and share the experience. Or this thing of over-identification. So this was another one that I had to sort of look up a little bit. And this is where we obsess about a particular flaw, negative emotion, that kind of thing, as opposed to being mindful of the balance. Mm-hmm. So we're all going to exist somewhere on a spectrum where those things play a role to some degree. And we can either be uncompassionate. So if all of the negative things are running roughshod through our psyche and emotional state, then we're uncompassionate towards ourselves, full of judgment, very negative position to be in. At the other end of the spectrum, all the good stuff is in play, good self-kindness, common humanity, mindfulness, and so we are highly self-compassionate, and our buffer as a result is going to be much, much bigger. We might also be in the middle. So either sort of, they call it in the study, self-responding or moderately self-compassionate. So where there's a balance of the negative and positive forces at play. And obviously the combination and interaction of those things is going to be individual. But yeah, so we're all going to be on that scale. We're all probably going to move on that scale at different times, depending on all sorts of stuff that's going on in life. And I think whilst in one sense it's natural to think that if we put ourselves out there in a sporting context and as athletes and in quite a tough endurance sport environment, whatever that looks like for you, you could easily look at it and you could kind of go, well, the most self-compassionate thing to do is almost to hide away and to not do that, because then that's easier. I actually don't think that that's necessarily building those skills of self-compassion. What it's better to do is to put ourselves out there, learn to flex this self-compassion muscle so that we have a buffer that operates for us in sport, but it also operates for us in life, because really sport is just a microcosm of life. And then when other hard stuff comes along, we have actually through sport learned a skill that can help us flourish in life. Again, not make the bad stuff go away, but give us that buffer and that skill set to be able to deal with it a bit more healthily.
It's resilience, isn't it? It's kind of resilience and tolerance to, using training as an analogy, you build up a tolerance to training, don't you? You do training to build up. So when it comes to race day, your body is ready to perform at that level. So it's it's kind of, they use mindfulness training as training for the mind, like you would use physical training for the body.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we see, so I love what you said about resilience. So if we look at elite athletes, high performing athletes, one of the very common traits across that group of people and across sports is that they're highly resilient. And the easy definition of resilience is that they see negative things in a positive way. So they can reframe very, very well. Failure is okay because I can learn from it. It's a classic example. Or, it's no one thing is too terrible. We can learn and we can adapt and we can do better next time. You're right to say that underneath resilience, I think, sits a lot of this stuff. So it's not that process is natural in a lot of cases. It's probably trained. And I think a lot of people will go through an active process of sitting down, unpacking it, doing all the self-compassion thing, so they're resilient, So they then grow and they have, more of a kind of growth mindset, mastery of the sport mindset, and don't become so fixated on judgment and outcome and all of those kind of things.
I think you mentioned the training. Training is the important part, because we know from our experience of being involved in mindfulness stuff that it's not something you just do as well. I mean, we're kind of focusing a bit more on well, I'm focusing a bit more on the mindfulness because that's where some of my background is. But it's not something you just do when you feel anxious. You need to sort of it's training, isn't it? You do it regularly so that when something happens, as you said, that buffer is already there. You know how to deal with it. There's a guy, an author, I can't remember his name. He talks quite openly about his mental health stuff. Fairly popular author. His name will come back to me. But I watched him do a talk once, and he he said when he starts to get a panic attack, he's just he's ready for it. He sits down and just sort of says, bring it on, because he's done what he needs to do to prepare himself for it.
Yeah.
Which is great. Just quickly before we move on, I sort of made a wee note that because we talked about the positive and negative poles of each measure. Someone might be sitting more in the middle, someone might be sitting more up the top. But I think it's going to be, those scales are not 0 to 10 in every person. It's incredibly personal, and each person's experiences are going to be personal as well. So, someone who might be an 8 out of 10, if that was the scale on all the measures, just because they have those skills doesn't mean they're not going to experience bumps in the road. As you said, it's about how they cope with them, but it also doesn't mean that their struggles are any less than someone who's sort of lower down the scale, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's all sorts of factors to that, isn't there? Because you can look at someone might be very well trained in all of this self-compassion stuff. They might flex that muscle really well. They've done it for years. But that doesn't stop a really overt negative stimulus coming in, whatever that might be. Death, end of career, horrific injury, whatever it might be, that really rocks them and they don't have the coping mechanism. For someone else, it might be that their self-compassion muscle isn't quite as strong. So something comes in that's not as overt, but it still rocks them. And this is within a whole life context. So we're athletes, but we're living the rest of our lives as well. So sport might be going really well, but we might be rocked from something outside of sport. So I think, all we can really do, I think from this study and reading it, I felt it was a really valuable tool just to understand the process that we can all employ so that we are more able to tackle, face head on any of these things that come along in whatever form they come, at whatever stage in life they do. And so it was really useful for me to think, okay, right, self-kindness, common humanity, mindfulness, how can we get better at doing those things? Then we have the biggest buffer possible between us and that thing that's trying to, get to us
down. Yeah. No, and I mean, speaking about the common humanity, I've got another quote here. So, by reminding themselves that other people share their experiences, they identify more with others, and in doing so, they strengthen their sense of belonging and their social identity. Being part of a group, imagined or physically present, plays an important role in individuals' susceptibility to stress. So, again, talking about my previous research project, social support was huge in people being well in the community. So it wasn't just about physical well-being, it was about, physical health. It was about, well-being in a broader sense. So people having access to social support, social groups was really important to them.
Yeah.
In sport, I know that a lot of people tie their, in all aspects of life, actually, people tie their identity to sometimes one thing. So people might view themselves as a triathlete or view themselves as a runner, and that's their thing, which I think is great, because then you're invested in something you really care about. But it can also hurt when things go wrong, or maybe you don't have that group around you.
Yeah.
Interested to hear your thoughts on that.
We'll go away from the study for a second. So in the last 10 years at a performance sport level in the UK, there's been the emergence of performance lifestyle practitioners. So these are practitioners that basically look after and support the holistic well-being of elite athletes in the pressure cooker that is elite sport. And one of the first things they do with athletes at all levels on a pathway, at least in my experience, is that they'll do a thing called more to me. And that is where they get them usually to write like a big bit of paper. It's like fun, crafty, like primary school kind of homework, but it works really well. And you're like, more to
Crayons.
me. Sorry?
With crayons.
You can do it with whatever you want. You can do it with crayons, colored pens, make a collage, but you write more to me in the center of the paper, or you put a photo of yourself. And then all around it, you just scatter everything that's important to you. And that can be whatever it is, your cuddly toy at home, the TV program you like to watch, your friends, your family, where you like to go on holiday, your favorite food, your puppy dog, anything that is important to you. And the reason for that is because there is more to me, more to you than being an athlete. And whilst we're not taking it out of this study, this is feeds into this kind of self-compassion idea as well, and potentially the common humanity bit. We all are a broad spectrum, we're not just one thing. And the mindfulness bit, we're more than just one thing, we need to hold our whole selves in balance. And it means that when injury comes or when career ends for the professional athlete, you can immediately look at that bit of paper and go, there is more to me. And it's another thing that increases that buffer. So, okay, one bit of my life is bad. Sport has gone bad for some reason, but there are so many other things that are going well and that might be really good. And I think seeing ourselves as more than just an athlete is incredibly important, because if our identity is wrapped up in one thing, we're on a very shaky foundation. It's like being on a tightrope, right? If it breaks, there's nothing else. Whereas, if we build up a surer bridge, then we're going to be all the better for it.
Yeah, and I mean that activity you're talking about, it's not to say one of these things doesn't matter. If you're saying, like, it's not saying, oh, your sport doesn't matter, you had a bad race, oh no, it doesn't matter because you've got all these other things. It's saying it's about it just being one aspect. So people who have got their identity tied up in sport, we're not saying don't care about your sport. Absolutely care about your sport.
Yeah.
But it's, as you said, it's about recognizing that it's not the be all and end all at all times. Race day, focus, headphones in,
Yep.
head down, get on with the race, and then go home and do the, mow the lawn or whatever it is, It's a sort of in the moment thing, isn't it?
It is. It always reminds me, the first time I think I was really aware of this was, so I love tennis. Like, basically, I'm a tennis player who does triathlon and doesn't play tennis. But I love tennis as a sport, and I grew up watching it. And I noticed when I wasn't that old. So Andre Agassi, used to love Andre Agassi, he got rubbish at tennis and went through a really bad patch in life, mental health terrible, ranked outside the top 100 in the world. And then, essentially, he became a father. And I remember him. He then got back to top 3 in the world, winning tournaments, all of that stuff. And I remember him in an interview saying something along the lines of, "Well, I play, and as soon as it's over, there's someone who doesn't care how the game went." And he'd never been able to disassociate. So he over-identified, to use the language of this study. He would over-identify with the particular result or the thing that happened within tennis, rather than looking at all of the other good stuff. And when there's a little baby that suddenly does not care that you lost a tennis game, you have to switch into dad mode, and you suddenly gain that skill. And I noticed Andy Murray said exactly the same thing when he became a dad. And if you look through all sports, you'll see multiple athletes, mums, dads, all ages and experiences, having and sharing exactly the same feeling. So yes, it can be really, really important. That is an important thing. It's going to be up there on your sheet of important stuff. But there is other important stuff as well. And it's all equal. Psychologists will, be quick to tell us, we understand I am many different people. And Joel the athlete, Joel the dad, Joel the husband, Joel the friend, Joel the career person, whatever, are equally valid parts of me, and I have to feed and make sure that all of those parts are equally healthy, and that not one is any more or less important than the others.
Yeah, I like that. Just as you mentioned, the over-identification, I thought that could feed into the next one. So another quote here: the negative pole of mindfulness is over-identification, as we said, wherein individuals focus exclusively on their suffering and are caught in rumination. Rumination implies a constant focus on problems and their associated negative emotions, causes, and consequences. So when I first read that, the thing that jumped out to me was post-race evaluation. You know, you finish the race and you go, oh, that was terrible. I had a bad race. Or a good one I thought of was when people do VO2 max tests. So, the test is performed to volitional exhaustion, it's called. So it's, basically when people give up. And kind of 95% of the time people finish, they'll finish, and within a few seconds they're going, oh, I could have gone further. And it's, and I'm completely guilty of this. The race at the weekend, it was a not a great race for me. And you focus on the negatives rather than immediately focusing on the positives. What's your thoughts on, I guess, on the negative side of mindfulness, that over identification?
I've had about 15 thoughts while you were speaking, so I'm probably just going to get lost in them. But one of the things that I've still got in my head is we think about certain models of psychology and the many different people that we are. And if we think about, some listeners will be aware of Jordan Peterson, who's a bit of a psychologist, a bit of a theologian, and he's done a lot of work around the archetypes model. And these are essentially the different voices that are common amongst humanity that speak to us. His model is particularly directed towards men, but I think it has an application towards women as well. And there is one of the voices is the warrior voice that speaks to us. So in athletes, this warrior voice is really loud. It's the GI voice of like the army person in your head that goes, go on, you can, yes, go over the top, fight, battle, work harder. You can just imagine the army drill sergeant, right? Now that is a really positive voice in many ways, because it drives us to do uncomfortable things, to take part in sport. It might push us to a PB. But each one of these voices has a dark side. It has a shadow side. And the shadow side of that warrior voice in this particular model, or models are wrong, but some are useful, is that it tells us we're not good enough. And it's that voice that we need to turn on when the gun goes, but we need to turn off immediately that we cross the finish line. So, because or else it does what you just experienced at the weekend for your race. It tells you, oh no, you could have gone harder. Oh no, you didn't. Oh no, you whatever. And it over identifies you, if you like, on that made up story that you didn't try hard enough. And it kind of shouts at you a bit. Now, one of the other voices in this model is the lover voice. So it's the one that says, you're okay. You did all right. Don't worry about it. Now, athletes tend to turn and dial that voice down far too much. And I've almost felt like we need to be able to flick on the warrior voice at the start of the race and flick on the lover, compassionate voice at the end of a race or at the end of a test, at the end of something like that. And then we get the balance of those two things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I like that. And we're running low on time, so I'll maybe finish off with one more quote, and then we can see how we're getting on. So the paper points out that a certain level of mindfulness is necessary to create some distance from the experience of suffering. This distance can help develop the component self-kindness and common humanity. So the reason I brought this one up is because I remember reading a while ago what happens, the sort of process when we go to sleep is, our brain chemistry kind of shuts down, our stress chemistry shuts down, and that kind of removes some of the emotional intensity of memories. So, if you think about an argument or something one day, it's a lot less intense the next day because of this process.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's, in a way, it's some of the aim of mindfulness. You don't want to, you're not forgetting or you're not removing the emotion, but you're sort of just almost distancing yourself from it. Like, and all that, rising above it and experiencing it from a different viewpoint.
Yeah, this is quite nuanced, and it sounds woolly, I think, until you do it. So I would urge
Yeah.
anyone who this is new to and we can maybe talk about practical stuff in a minute, but sit with emotion and try and recognize emotion without it kind of washing over you too much. Couple of things to say. Time can give that distance to help you to be a little bit more objective. As you just said, sometimes it's good to sleep on it and come back to it the next day. We talked about mindfulness and the opposite of mindfulness being the over identification, so the over obsession with the negative. And you've just said about there being some distance can be useful. One of the other things that's important to point out is that there is another potential negative to mindfulness, and that is numbing. And that is where people put too much distance. I am not going to think about this. The problem is that whilst we can act that, it's still in here. We can suppress it as much as we like, but in the end, it will come out in some kind of a way. And that's where the active process of mindfully appreciating what's going on and holding it in balance with other stuff helps us to be okay with what is, rather than just go, nah, not going to think about this, thanks.
Stuff it down there. Yeah.
Too hard. Yeah, which ultimately doesn't work. It's just masking it.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have any sort of takeaway practical applications? And maybe it's something we can cover in more depth, but maybe you've got a couple of key takeaways for people.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like this is two podcasts, but we'll maybe come back to it another time. One of the things I thought was useful was how the people who designed the study, what they actually got the participants to do. So we've got 5 minutes left, and for those who are listening, well done for sticking with us this far. But maybe these are some of the things that you could do if this is like new for you. So in the study, the self-kindness intervention, if you like, was writing a letter. So thinking about the painful issue you mentioned earlier on. So for each of the participants, they thought of a real painful issue that they were experiencing. And then they wrote a letter to themselves as if they were writing to someone else who they cared for.
Yeah.
And that can be odd to get around that language, but it can, you write, think about the person you love most in the world. You're going to write a letter to them. They're experiencing what you're experiencing. What do you say? You're okay because X, Y, and Z. Don't worry because X, Y, and Z. There is all of these things. You show yourself that self-kindness. The important point is that it's active. So you don't just think it, you are writing this down. It is an actual process, it's journaling, and it's something that you can come back to. So that's how people can take this kind of self-kindness thing and actually do it in real life. Would you have anything to add to that before I move on?
No, only that journaling is in itself is a really good, it's not something I've done, but I know that it's really valuable for some people. So it's maybe something else people can look into, just not necessarily even in that format, but have a look at it if it's something you're interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. It is something I've come to do. So this is something that I didn't do for most of my life, and then in the last sort of probably 3-4 years has been something that has been more actively a part of my day. So part of my morning routine is to for me as a Christian, I'll reflect, I'll pray, and then I'll actually do a little bit of a journal, which is more about how if I'm dealing with a particular issue, rather than almost telling myself that things are okay, I try and imagine, like, if God's up there and he's real and he created and loves me, then what does he say to me? So that's quite useful as well. It's the same thing, it's just a different version of the same thing. That works for me, and I have found it really helpful. The common humanity thing is, again, writing down other ways that other people experience these kind of things. So you think of that real judgment, let's say, or failure, two really common things within the sports arena. And you can maybe think about someone else who you know, who you work with, who's maybe experienced the same thing. They went and they did a presentation and it didn't go very well at work, or they were subject to some really unfair criticism from the boss, but isn't fair on them, but that they found really difficult, and you've experienced the same kind of thing. Don't think of lots of examples, just something that connects you to those other people or that other person, so that you know you're not alone in this. Even better version of that is actually talk to someone about it.
Yeah.
Anything to add?
No, just well, I suppose that link, that common humanity, the key thing with that was the links to social groups and, you know, having that support network. So I think actually speaking to someone about it sort of ties in quite nicely with that, you know, finding a support for that.
Yes. Yep. And finally, mindfulness. Classically, this is done where you can write, you can sit, but you will close your eyes and you can spend a bit of time recognizing what the feeling is or the thought is that is driving that emotional state. You know, what is it about it? And then try and pick out and find other things that just balance that in a way. So again, if it's the judgment of another person or if it's the failure in a sporting context, it's also reflecting on the love of another family member who adores you and the success of something else that you've done in life. You are both of those people. Both are equally relevant. And it's just holding both of those until it starts to soften the emotional state.
Good. No, I like that. Very useful takeaways for people. So thank you very much for listening. Hope you've benefited from this conversation. If you think of any other things that you'd like us to chat about, then by all means get in touch. But for now, we'll see you next week.
Grand. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found that podcast really useful. And if you did, then it's just a sample of the information that's available across the Elevate platform. Where we want to drive you towards is the Team Elevate community pages. If you're enrolled on any one of the courses across the Elevate platform, you can sign up. And if you do, then it's the place where individuals like you can come together to grow, share ideas, ask questions, interact with us, and be the first to hear about upcoming courses and exclusive offers. So if you haven't signed up, sign up to Team Elevate now, and we hope to see you there soon.